Happy holidays everyone, I am Nav from Vectric Support. Today we'll be going through making a snowflake lantern for Christmas. As you can see here, we've got one here. Makes a great mantel piece, looks really fun. It'll be easy to make as well, and we'll be going through this in the software momentarily. Just to let you know, this is a VCarve project because it uses a VCarving toolpath that you can see just there on the side of the lantern. But enough about this, let's hop into the software and find out how to make it. Okay, so now that we're in the software, we're going to create a new file. So let's go over to create a new file. We'll just click that and we're going to set up our job setup sheet. Now in this case, I'm doing a single-sided job. My width is 22.5, my height is 20.5 inches, 0.45 inches thick, and my units are of course in inches. I've set the Z0 to the material surface in my case, and the XY datum in the lower left. Now, please do adjust these settings for your machine because they may be different depending on what material you're using, and if you prefer to use millimeters instead of inches, so please be sure to reflect that. And we're not using any modeling here, so we can go ahead and use the standard resolution. So let's hit OK. Okay, so now that we're in the software, the first thing we're going to do is set up our snowflakes. So I'm going to import a bitmap for our snowflakes, and you will be provided with these, and you'll have the vectors for the file as well. So if you do want to edit them, you're more than welcome to. So let's just open up that first bitmap. And as you can see, we've got quite a sharp snowflake here, and this is what we're going to use for our V-carving. So this is specifically going to go on our side panels. So we're going to use the trace bitmap tool over here, which is under the create vectors section of the drawing tab. So we just click on that, and in this case we're going to use the black and white option here. I'm just going to increase the threshold just a little bit. I'm going to preview that, just have a look at my vectors here, and they do look clean, so I'm going to use that as my set of vectors. Hit apply, close that out. And as you can see, we've now got a bitmap layer and a new layer, and a new layer called layer 1 has our snowflake on it. So I'm just going to rename that to VCarve snowflake, and I'm going to turn on our bitmap layer again. I'm just going to delete this vector because I don't need it. This bitmap because I don't need it anymore. So let's get rid of that. And now I'm going to import a new bitmap, which will be our second snowflake, which we're going to use for our front and back panels. So we'll just bring that in. Okay, so now what we're going to do is just make sure this is the active layer, which it is. Select our bitmap, go over to the trace bitmap tool, and again, just going to preview it to see what it looks like first. And that looks very clean. I'm happy with that, so I'm just going to hit apply. And again, we've now got a set of vectors for our snowflake. And I'm just going to delete the bitmap from the background here. And I'm going to put this one in its own layer too. So I'm going to just right click it and put move to layer. And I'm going to have a new layer name. And I'm going to call this one front and back snowflake. And I will give it a different color just so it stands out. And I'll do the same for my VCarve. I'll change the color up at the top here, and I'll give it a different shade there on purple, just so they stand out from each other. There we go. Okay, so now with that set up, we are now going to have a look at adding our panels layer. Now this is going to be the majority of our design here. So we're going to create the panels for our job. So this will be the front, the back, and the side panels for our lantern. So first things first, let's create a new layer for that, so it's nice and organized. And now we're on the active layer, we're going to go ahead and create our panels. Okay, so to create our panels, we're going to need to first just create one panel each, one for the front, one for the side, and then we'll end up copying them to save some time here. So the first panel I'm going to make is going to be a width of 4 inches and a height of 6 inches. So I'm just going to go ahead and create that. So this is going to be our front and back panel. I'm just going to move it up so we're utilizing the most of my material here. And for the side panel, it's going to be 3 inches wide with 6 inches of height. Now the reason for this is because when we come to actually assemble it later, you'll see that it will get a nice snug fit out of this when we come to do this. Now, as part of our setup, we're just going to go ahead and now adjust this just a little bit and do some offsets for the vectors to create some borders and to create some space for the cutouts. So I'm just going to go ahead and now use this tool in the bottom left called the offset and layout offset selected vectors tool, so we're just going to click on that. So we're actually going to offset our large front and back panel here to the inwards and left option, and we're going to go 0.45, which is, if you recall, my material thickness. And the reason I'm doing this is because when we come to actually machine this out and assemble it, this thickness here between this inner border now and the outer border, it will be the thickness of the material. And if you imagine the side panel here, when you turn it on its side and stick it onto the back of this panel here, it will effectively hide the side panel. So there's not any part of the panel that's going to be sticking out, which is important why we use the thickness here to offset by. So whatever your thickness is, use that as the offset here, so it will hide the side of this panel here when you come to glue it together later. I'm also going to do another offset of this vector. I'm going to do the 0.25 just to create a border. Now this will just be a V-carving border that we're going to use just to make it look nice, and we'll do the same over here as well for our side panels. So again, use the offset tool, 0.25 inches in, and there we are. So this is now our panels set up, ready for our snowflake vectors. So next thing we're going to do is now put our snowflakes onto our panels. So let's take our front one first. So let's take our front vector. So we're just going to size this down by holding shift, and I'm just going to grab one of the bottom corners, and I'm just going to push my mouse in. I'm just going to come and drag it over now to the center of my panel. Now I'm just going to line it up to the point where the edge of the snowflake touches, you can see here, the edge of my panel. Now the reason I want it to do that is because I want some stability when we're cutting out, because we're going to be creating a pocket here, and I really want some stability here for our toolpath, so that when we come to cut it out, it's actually sticking onto the side here, so we've got enough room to work with, and when we cut out all these sections, it'll be nice and stable. So I'm quite happy with that, so I'm just going to place that there for the moment, and I'm going to do the same with our V-carving snowflake. So I'll just turn on our layer for our V-carving snowflake as well. Same thing again, just going to hold shift, bring that down to what I think is a reasonable size, and pull that into the center here. If you've got your snapping options on, you can snap to the center like that. So snapping options are just up at the top here, and we're just going to pull this in a little bit, and there we are. Now a key thing to point out here is that unlike our front and back panels, which will be pocketed out, so this area here and this area here will be pocketed out, our V-carving for our side panels will leave all of this intact. So we're just going to V-carve on top of the vector here itself. We're not actually going to cut any of this out, so it gives us a lot more room to work with. Whereas with this one, we're going to do a little bit of trimming here for the vectors, and we're going to pocket this area out. So let's come over to our trim tool. This is the interactive trim tools, which is the scissors icon over here, and we're going to trim away these vectors, and we want this option turned on here to rejoin the trim sections when the form is closed. So I'm just going to zoom in and trim away any vectors that I will not need. Let me just ungroup these vectors first. So click on them, right click, ungroup, there we are. So now I can edit these vectors individually. So I'm just going to click this one away, click this one away. I'm just going to work my way around, getting rid of all these vectors. And there we are. Okay, so now that is all joined up on there, ready to go. Now you may notice actually it's going to be joined up here, so there'll be a line here. So what we can do is just get rid of that section there, get rid of that section there, down here, and over here. Because we're going to be cutting around this, okay? So we don't need to worry about this section in particular, because we'll be cutting in this section around this snowflake. And there we are. We have our panels set up, ready to go. Now what I will do in this scenario is just highlight one of my panels, hold Control on the keyboard, and then drag this across, and you'll have an identical copy of your panel. You can do the same here, hold Control, drag it across, and there's your front and side panels ready to go. So the next thing we're going to do is create a base. Now the base is going to be the width of our panels here, so 4 inches and 3 inches. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and create 3 inch by 4 inch square, and then we click that, and then we're going to go into our offset tool again, and we're going to use our thickness to offset by. So in this case, I'm going to be offsetting this vector outwards and right by the thickness of the material, because these will be slotting into this panel here. Okay, so we just offset that by that thickness, and importantly, we want to add some fillets in. And this is going to be the radius of your tool. In this case, I used a 1/4 inch end mill, so the radius will be 0.125. So we want to add some fillets in so you can get a nice flush fit for your corners here. So you've got a bit of wiggle room to get the corners in here. So the tool that we're looking for is the fillet tool, which is just over here under Edit Objects. And we're going to be using a dog bone fillet. And as I said, I'm going to be using the tool radius, which is 0.125. I'm just going to go to the corners here. You can see the little check icon pops up when you can fillet it. And we're just going to go ahead and do that for all of our corners. Now, I am going to now create another vector offset from this again, but this is going to be used for our chamfer. So in this case, I'm going to offset this vector again, but this time by 0.7, which is 0.45 plus 0.25, 0.7. Now, so that means the distance between this vector here and this one is 0.25. I'm going to be using this for a chamfered toolpath. And then finally, I'm going to do one more offset, and for myself, in this case, I'm going to go for 0.2021. Now, the reason I'm going for this very specific value here is because when I came to do my testing for my chamfered toolpath, when my chamfer cut into this area here, I wanted to leave a bit of a flat edge around the bottom of the chamfer, just because for safe tooling, I didn't want to tool around the very edge of the chamfer, so the part came loose. So I found in my testing that adding a nice flat edge to it made it look good, but also added some stability to it as well. So in your case, you may want to do some testing beforehand and adjust this value, but for my case, this is why I used 0.2021. Now I am actually going to give you a second base option here as well, and I'll show you that in just a moment, because I'm going to switch to the file that we are going to provide you with this project. So let's go have a look at that, and also look at some of the toolpathing that we've got in store for you as well. Okay, so here's the file that you're going to get with your project. Now you can see here I've labeled it for you. Here's the open base and here's the channel base. And I'll explain the differences. If I go over to my toolpath menu, the channel base is the one that I just spoke of, where you're going to be slotting these in to get the extra stability from this part that isn't cut out here. But if you wanted an open base, you could do that as well. And the open base is just here. So it's just a big pocket here, and you can use that to line up your job. It just gives you a bit of a different look. And if you wanted to sit any sort of light that you have deeper into the actual lamp to hide it a little bit, you can do that as well. So I'm just giving you some options here for different bases, just so you have some options for different cuts, as well as you may not want to cut a chamfer because it may take longer for you. So in this case, I've included this base as well, where it's just a simple cutout toolpath with a straight edge. So you've got an option there for a chamfered base as well as a straight edge base as well. And you may be wondering what this square is in the file here. Now this is actually a test square. So what I did for the channel base, which is this one here, is I wanted to make sure that the actual pocket cut here, the channel, was the right thickness for my panel so that they would fit in correctly. So I cut a test part, and I've included that for you as well, just in case you want to cut it yourself. So this you can use to cut out first before you do anything else, and then you can cut this pocket out and you can just slot it in to see if it's a nice snug fit. And then if it isn't, you can always go ahead and adjust the allowance here. And it's important to note it's a negative pocket allowance here. So this a negative allowance will cut outwards, a positive will cut inwards. So we want the negative pocket allowance. I've done it 0.01 in my case. You may want to adjust that for your values in your case, but 0.01 worked for me. But you can always increase this if you find it's still a bit too tight. You can run the toolpath again by increasing this value, calculating it, and then saving off the G code again. Make sure to do that, and then run it again. So you can test this, use this test part again to save you a little bit of hassle in the end in terms of going to cut the whole design out and finding that your panels don't fit. So I highly recommend doing that first. Okay, so with that said, let's have a look at our toolpaths. So the first one I've got here is our pocket toolpath for our snowflakes over here. So you can see if I open it up, I've actually got a clearance pass. I've got a 1/4 inch end mill that's got these vectors here, and it will pocket out this area here. In fact, if I show you with this view on here with the solid view, and we just turn it on, that this is the area it'll be cutting out. And then after that, the 1/8 inch will go in and cut the areas that the 1/4 inch could not. Now in my case, I went down just a little bit over the cut depth because I want to pocket this whole area out. So I went 0.46. If you recall, my thickness is 0.45. So I went just a little bit deeper to get a nice smooth finish on that and cut it out and not have any bits hanging on afterwards. In regards to the V carving, you can see here that I've got the V carving on our snowflakes down here, and in my case I use a 1/4 inch 60-degree VBit, and the settings here I've used for my tool are specific to the machine that I was using. So please do make sure to check your, either with your manufacturer settings or your manual settings for your machine, that you're using the safe and appropriate settings for your machine, and really important that you're using the feed units in the correct units as well. So do make sure to adjust these for your machine as well. And then we've got our profile to do some border work. So you can see here it's going around to do the borders for our snowflakes, as well as doing a little bit of V-carving on these snowflakes here, just to give them a little bit of detail. We have our chamfer, as I spoke of earlier, which is going to be going outside of our design over here, and that'll be going towards that outside edge. You can see it cuts just past the profile vector I'm using later on for my cutout, but that will square off that edge when I go to cut it out later. And you can see here I've got the different bases. So I've got the channel base pocket here, and I've labeled that for you, and the open base pocket here. So depending on which one you want to use, I've labeled them for you, so they'll be nice and easy to adjust, but you can always change the labels if you need to. And I've got my cutout pass here. Now you may notice on my cutout that I've actually put some tabs in, but not at the bottom of the panels here, because I want a nice clean finish to the bottom of the panels, and they weren't needed in terms of structure. They would be just fine without them. For my base, I did add in the tabs all the way around, but I did also add in a lead here, a circular lead, and a ramp here as well. You can see that in the bottom left here. Just because of the tool I was using a compression bit in this scenario, and it is important to note that when you are coming to cut some of these designs, for example, if you are using a compression bit, so for example with our channel pocket here, I edited the first pass, so the first pass was slightly longer than the measurement of the upcut part of the tool, because we didn't want any material effectively coming up and kind of getting fuzzy edges to your cut. So always make sure to, if you are using a compression bit, to measure that tool and adjust your passes accordingly so you get a nice clean finish on your cuts. So next what I'm going to do is have a look at our preview. So let's go ahead and go to the 3D view and start having a look at our preview for our jobs. So with 11.5 we've actually changed the preview quite significantly, and you may notice some changes now. So I'm going to slow down the preview for you so you can see what's going on. So I'm going to change the speed of this to about half, animate the preview and draw the tool. I'm going to look at our clearance pass first, and you can see here that now I can actually manipulate the 3D view in 11.5, which is really handy because you can actually see where the tool's getting in, and you can see as it's cutting where it is actually cutting as well, which is a really handy tool. You can see from the back end as well, so if you want to see from the behind where it would actually be cutting to, you can see that as well. But it's really good to see where your passes will be going, and I used this actually when I was cutting on the machine itself, because when I went to actually run the G-code, I slowed down my preview and I ran it just to see where the tool would start, so I knew exactly where to expect the tool to go. So for example, with this one we knew it was starting at the bottom half of this snowflake here. So what I'm looking out for on the machine is to see if the actual snowflake is actually starting on that bottom half there. And so it's a really handy tool, both in seeing your preview visually, but also being able to check where the physical tool is going to go, because the preview will show you exactly where the tool is going to go on your machine as well. So it's a really, really handy tool, and I highly recommend you take advantage of using it. And if you are upgrading to 11.5 or you have, please do play around with this, because it's a really, really nice tool now, and it's a great preview, and our devs worked very hard on it, so please do take advantage of it. With our 1/8 inch, you can see here it's going to go and clean up all the areas that our 1/4 inch could not do. So you can see it now working its way around to go around those areas just there. And it's just going to speed that up just a little bit so you can see it working through those areas. You can see it's now cleaning up all those areas on the snowflakes. And there we are, that's all done. We're now going to take a look at our VCarve snowflakes. Now this one's quite an interesting one, so I will slow it down just a little bit again, and you can see here how this works. So it's currently V-carving its way around the center of our snowflake, and it's going to keep doing that and eventually get to the outside bits. Now with this toolpath you may want to run this one twice. Now depending on what type of material you use, in my case I use plywood, but I ran this toolpath twice just to get a cleaner result. So, and it's quite a quick toolpath in this case. For me I was using a 1/4 inch 60-degree VBit, but I ran this one twice just to get a nice clean result. So ran it once and then got the VBit in again just to run around again, just to clean it up for you, so just some of the legwork for you. And we can see here with our profile, so we'll just keep it on the current speed, and you can see where it's going to start. So if we turn on our toolpath checklist here, you can see it's going to start on the bottom left and work its way around the border here, do its passes, do this one, and then go counterclockwise and go up to these ones as well. So I'll just zoom in that for you as well. And there we are. So this was really useful to me because specifically when I went to machine it, I could see that I did it in 3 passes. So I could just follow this preview as I was running it, and it would do the exact same. So I knew exactly what to expect and where the tool to go. So it is a very handy tool. And as you can see here, now we're getting some really nice detail on these snowflakes. So this is adding a little bit of flair to them. Because originally I was actually going to pocket these out, but the issue with that is if you pocket this area out, especially depending on what type of thickness you're using, it could add some instability, and this may break depending on how thick or how thin your material is. So a V-carving here actually works quite well because it still gives you a lot of detail, but without having to risk any sort of breakage or any sort of issues with your cut in the end as well. And there we are, you can see it cleans it up quite nicely. And there's our border there to finish it off. And we'll move on to our chamfer toolpath. So our chamfer, now as I mentioned earlier, with our chamfer toolpath, I've given you 2 options for a base here. So I've given you the chamfer, and I've also given you the option for the flat base. And as you can see, the chamfer is actually running around, and it's doing quite a lot of passes to get down to that desired angle that I've actually set up for the chamfer toolpath. In your case, obviously do make sure that when you check your chamfer toolpath settings that you adjust it for something that works for you. In my case, I went for a cut depth of 0.37, which is 0.9 off the final depth. And the reason I did that is because I wanted to leave some material behind for the cutout to do, so we've got some stability in there for our cutout. And here's our channel base slot. Now, important to note on this one, as I mentioned earlier, there's a pocket allowance just to make sure that our parts will actually fit at the end. So I've gone ahead and created an allowance for that. And in this case, when I did run it with my test part here, it did actually work out to be right first time. But in your case, don't be afraid to adjust it as needed. Here's our open one, which is just a pocket toolpath. And finally, the last 2 toolpaths we have are the cutout, which I'll open up for you so you can see. And you can see again, I've placed the tabs on the top of our panels here and the sides, but not the bottom, so we get a nice clean finish on the bottom. With the base, I did put it on all 4 sides for the extra stability, and we'll just run that toolpath for you. And as you can see, it starts in the bottom left here, so you can see, I'll slow it down for you so you can actually see where it's starting. So it starts on the next one, you'll see it will go to the bottom left to do its ramp and lead in. So if you keep an eye on this one, there we go, it does its ramp and lead in just there, and then it cuts around it as well. So again, do take advantage of this to know exactly where your toolpath is going to go. And it's also very useful in terms of spacing out your material. You can see here, these are actually quite close together. So you may consider, okay, well, am I going to have enough stability here, depending on my material, with this lead and ramp? Now, in my case, I did, but you may want to adjust the spacing here, and this is what the preview is quite important, because this can show you this kind of stuff before you actually go to cut it. So maybe you want to space these out just a little bit more in your case. And as I mentioned, here's my test cutout for my test piece, which was used to get into these slots. Now, one last thing I'm going to mention before we go over to the actual cutting side of things is in your file, you'll notice I've creased the distance here at the very bottom of these panels a further 0.25. Now, the reason I did that is because when you come to actually make your lantern, you want the base to the bottom of the panel to sit in the base so that the border here is still showing. So what I've done is I took the original vector here and I've increased it by another 0.25 down. And the reason I chose 0.25 is because that is what the value is for my pockets in my base here. So either one of the bases that you choose to use, that depth that you use here, you want to add that onto the bottom of the panel. I've done that for you in this case if you happen to use these settings, but as I mentioned, do double check your settings. But I've added that on here, so that what that means is when you come to slot this in, this border then should then show up for you at the bottom. Now, you're more than welcome to just have it so that the border is hidden if you want to, and it still looks great, but just thought I'd point that out before we go to the machine. So with our toolpath all set up, let's go have a look at machining this out. And here we have the finished result. So this is the snowflake lantern. As you can see, it turned out really, really well. You can see here that I've actually used the pocketed base. So I've given you the option for both. You've got the pocketed one, as well as the one that's on my left just here, which is the channel base. Now you can see here, here's my test piece, and I cut this out as the very first part of my design, just so I could test the channel was the right fit. And in my case, it was perfect first time. It may not be the case for you, so don't be afraid to adjust the toolpath if you need to. The other cool thing about this is you can always use it as a lid. So you can always pop it on top here as well. And if you want to use it as some stability for gluing, you could do that as well. But now you also have the option of making another base just to make into a lid. You also have the option of, if you don't want to use a chamfered toolpath, because the chamfer will just go around several times to get down to its depth, you could just use a quick end-mill cut. If you don't either want to use a VCarving chamfer toolpath there, you could just use a straight end mill and save yourself a lot of time there as well. So you've got the options there to do some different things with it. Likewise, if you did want to change the design a little bit and you wanted to have all of it to be hollow, like the front here, if you want to change these side panels, just take into account that you'll need to make sure that at least 2 parts of the snowflake on each edge touch the sides here to give you some stability when you're machining, and do take into account the tool that you're using, because you may not want to use a large tool if you're doing that, because do remember you've got a smaller area to work with. You should be okay to still use the end mill at the top here. When it comes to the details around here, you may want to use a smaller tool. In my case I used an 1/8 inch. You might be okay with that, but as I said, there's no harm in running test runs. But that brings us to the close of our project. I do hope you've really enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed making it. As you can see, it makes a great statement piece for a table or on a mantelpiece. And please do be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. We've got plenty more of these projects coming, and I hope you enjoy them all. And don't be afraid to be posting on our socials. We've got Instagram, a Facebook page, and we've got a Vectric forum. So if you do make one of these, send it to us, because we'd love to see it. Have a great holiday, guys.